you heard the opening about the general challenges and the issues. The investors talk about what it would take for them to actually put money in this space. And then now we're going to talk about people who represent the view of how do you actually build this software? How do you actually think about deploying it? So joining me is these 5 great gentlemen. And I'll just have them briefly introduce themselves and their role within and how they touch on software. So Paul, let's start with you.
Sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of Folsom Labs. We make Helioscope, the kind of sales and design software. I think there's probably enough other context about us out there, so I'll leave it at that.
Great. Eric?
I'm Eric Reinhardt. I'm Director of Product Management at Sunrun. So basically building all in-house tools to run our solar platform at Sunrun.
Hi, I'm Deep Chakraborty, co-founder and CEO of Enact Systems. We are an end-to-end platform for solar software. We're also outside. We'd love to meet people after the talk.
Thomas Enzendorfer, president of SolarGent and Solar Engine, and I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations of both of those organizations.
Hi, I'm CEO and co-founder of Wonder Capital, and what we do is use software to allow us to connect small commercial solar projects with the financing industry. So there's a big fixed cost problem with financing deals below about $1 million, and we use software to drive down our costs in such a way that we can service the sub-$1 million commercial financing market.
Fantastic. So it's great that we have just a gamut of third-party software providers as well as in-house teams and representing different scales as well within the customer base. So first of all, maybe for starting with Deep and Paul, in terms of building the third-party tools that you have, how did you settle on that specific issue, or why was what you're covering the specific challenge or need that you thought needed a software tool to fix?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start, and I can say, for me and Paul, when we started, we were out there developing projects and using new technologies, and getting these new technology or these projects built, finance designs, was a pretty labor-intensive process 5 or 6 years ago. And, that's really where we started, was like, how do you accelerate that process? Build the tools that let people iterate quickly with customers, go really quickly from, I've got a place that you might want to put solar on, to, is it worth putting solar on, to what am I actually going to sell the user, and how do we close that value loop? So for me, it was just, it was born out of that real need from being in the industry, and the software was just an outcropping of that.
Mm-hmm. Deep for Enact?
Well, so it's my 10th year in the industry, and before Enact, I ran a distribution business, which was headquartered in Phoenix. So even 5 years ago, MJ, the slide you showed today with the sales enablers, the boots on the roof, and of course the finance, the money guys, those segments were forming. Mm-hmm. And so when I left to start Enact over 4 years ago, we really felt there's a need for an end-to-end platform. Mm-hmm. So we had used a lot of good point solutions. And so looking backwards, that was the genesis of Enact, to have a platform that really connects the dots, to have all the modules that would serve the marketplace of the future. We don't see the marketplace yet. You're seeing Comcast enter solar in the Bay Area. You're seeing retailers enter solar. So we don't really know where the marketplace will be, mm-hmm. but we want to make sure the platform exists for the players of the future.
And then with Thomas and Brian, Thomas, your customers are this long tail that everyone celebrates and is so happy to see emerge now. In terms of what are you seeing as far as their perspective on software and the solutions that they need?
It's tough. So we have 5,000 installers nationwide, and solar has never scaled well in this country, right? We've seen it from the solar cities of the world. We've seen it from some other players. I'm not going to mention some, but there has been a problem of scaling this industry well and profitable. And software has taken an approach to this that is very difficult for some of our installers to use. When you look at the software, it's either too expensive, it is too specific for one financing solution for one aspect of the problem. But when we saw your guys' presentation as the keynote speech, how many different workflows there are and how different each one of those solutions needs to be, it becomes very difficult for our customer base. And one element to that as well, not only do we have customers that have a very small scale group, but also these customers very often don't do only solar. They do other elements as well. And so the software becomes really, really tricky, and so far we haven't seen that real solution that allows to scale well past a broader scale of installers.
And so then the decision then to bring stuff in-house, Brian, for Wunder, why go in-house versus, finding a third-party solution? And maybe the same question to you, Eric, with Sunrun.
Yeah, and I think it's the same question for our installer partners, right? And I think, we have less installers, we have more than 100 installer partners, but those folks disproportionately are not great users of software, is what we found. They're not on their computers all day. They don't like being on their computers. They don't think of it as the primary thing that they do. So we think that if you think about what installers do on small projects, they're playing both the installation role and the developer role, right? The traditional developer role, customer acquisition, procurement, financing. We think that installers likely will continue to do the construction work. I'm not sure how much software there is there. There's probably a little bit. But we think that soft cost bucket, customer acquisition, again, procurement, financing, compliance, right? You look at what Renovate America's done in PACE and their automation of that space. These folks aren't good at software. They don't use it well. We think you should deliver it to them as a service and basically carve out that piece of their business. And instead of giving them a customer acquisition tool or a CRM tool, give them a customer, right? Instead of giving them procurement software, drop ship it to the location at the right date, right? And what we've seen is that this market is playing out the way construction plays out, the way HVAC is played out. Construction is a local business. It doesn't scale well, to your point. It's fragmented across industries. It's relatively low margin. We think delivering those customers things that they're not inherently good at and they're not good users of is the way to bring software to this industry, not to arm them with tools.
Yeah, I think, as the panel said before, it's a balance of process and software, right? I think you have to decide as a company, can you support building something in-house to support your specific process that'll give you an advantage? And if you can't, and you can't make a commitment to ongoing support of that software, then you probably should be looking outside your business to make that work. But if you do that, then you have to make the trade-off of, am I willing to be flexible with my process to accommodate the software that's going to come in, or am I going to have to, or do I really want to stick to the way I'm running my business? And that decision point is difficult for smaller, long-tail companies, and it's one that's hard to make, but one that you're going to have to make as you start thinking about scaling. So.
Well, what about for Sunrun, for example? Where do you decide then, you're not a small installer, obviously, but you do work with a number of partners, but you also have the direct platform.
Right.
Where do you decide to focus? Where do you then decide to go outsource?
Yeah, and that actually has to come, I think there's a couple ways to look at it, but one is looking at how big of a problem is it solving for you as a company? So, at Sunrun, we're trying to figure out where are the real big impact pieces of the process that we can automate or really streamline. And then making those pieces we tend to want to build in-house because they're critical to the solar chain and they make a big impact. But then we also think about, can we make this process and software platform scalable enough that our partners can use it and leverage it as well? And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. But also I think then there's the outward focus of something like scheduling, where maybe you want to look outside to something established software vendors that are out there, or power dialing. Like, we don't really want to build our own power dialing platform. Those are pretty established for the last 20 or 30 years, right? So you kind of have to make a decision about what's real in the marketplace that's already scalable and already works, and can you translate that to the entire platform.
Mm-hmm. And in that light too, again, thinking about Paul and Deep, you guys have different approaches to being a vendor, right? One as a point solution. How do you think of it in terms of integrating with the rest of the ecosystem to provide that seamless process? And Deep, again, we've sort of been talking about like trying to be everything to everyone. Where do you then have to, do you have to focus specifically, or do you really have to build everything to be great from the start?
I can probably go first. No, we cannot build everything to go first. In fact, we realized a couple of years ago that we have to partner. We have to partner with all of the different players in the ecosystem to really make a platform work. That's how platforms are born. In fact, even for software, we are a partner to Salesforce, Zoho, Microsoft. We have several points on our workflow where Excel is seamlessly integrated and easy to upload and download. We have partnered with finance vendors. We have partnered also with design. In fact, Eagle View outside, pulling better images. We cannot do everything. So a platform exists because it's not a SaaS pipe. It's really not a SaaS model anymore. It's really a platform where everyone benefits by coming onto it. Installers benefit by working on it, sharing data, and getting out of it more than they are giving into us, right? Similarly, financiers benefit because they can have visibility to pipelines. They can now predict the business better. They can reduce their cost of maybe onboarding a new installer in a new state. And so the trends that you see that drive a platform play are pretty much similar across the US. You're seeing similar trends now in other markets. In fact, it's even more so because the price points are lower than here. In the US, we are blessed to have solar at $3 a watt residential. It's less than half of that in most of the world for residential. So you really have the need for a platform where you can cut your operational costs, but as Paul said, even grow your business faster than you could do it on your own.
Yeah, so I mean, I would agree with a lot of that, where I think, the idea of a platform and taking the best the ecosystem has to offer at each stage of the pipeline is critical. I think actually one of the big insights I had from last year, when you had a lot of big vertically integrated players saying, there's no all-in-one solution, but I think one of the big pain points was kind of what you alluded to, where it's like, if you're a huge company and you're evaluating end-to-end software solutions, you fundamentally got to find a solution that meshes really well with your process. And to what you were saying, to what Paul was saying earlier, there are so many processes out there that makes the sales process very hard. That makes it long. It makes the value proposition for the customer pretty tricky, because you're asking them to fundamentally change a business model that's worked for them for years. And especially for these bigger players that have been doing solar, for 5 to 10 years, they have something that works that they have been scaling, and they're trying to figure out how to make it to the next leap, make the next step. But asking them to change everything to use a new software tool is a hard ask, and is a hard way to make inroads as a software. So that's where our strategy. I'm just saying, I agree completely with the idea of a platform and doing that through APIs and everything. But there's an idea of land and expand where maybe the current scaling issue a company is struggling with is design. So you start with Helioscope, and then it's like, oh, well, now that we're here, we've been using Excel for our financial models, but there's something else. Like, okay, let's layer on Energy Toolbase or something else downstream. And then it's like, oh, we've got to go through the pipeline to actually build things. Now let's add in, I don't know, like a Unirack integration. Like suddenly you get a lot of the more mechanical design stuff. And we'll never be the best at, racking ballast calculations. We'll never be the best at, like rate engine calculations. And naturally, as we grow, we'll want to add more to what we do internally, just to lower those early adoption costs for our users. But ultimately, I think particularly as the processes get bigger and more elaborate, being able to pick across from a range of the best that's available and making that as seamless a process as possible is critical.
Seamless has to mean UX and UI, and that's one thing that we don't see much right now out there. So again, our customer base is they're not interested in learning a lot about the software. They're not interested in learning this different, to be quite frank, some of them don't even want to know the names of those companies. They just want to have it, they want it to work. And if the UX and UI factor is being considered more closely, then I think the platform approach has much more ability to be successful.
In terms of the UX, UI, what are common pain points that you see that make people give up on like a potential new software tool?
It depends. If it's sometimes it's hyper technical, sometimes it's hyper complicated to sign on. Sometimes it's the cost associated with each one of those platforms. Sometimes it's simple as I need a password for every one of my logins, from design to finance to project management. And I know some people laughing at you, but this is the problem that we're seeing each and every day. And
I think the hardest part in software is trying to get someone to log on. I don't know why, but we never can't figure that out. So.
Is our IT department out there listening too? Yeah.
I also think that there's a consideration on training. So in any industry, there's turnover, but in software and solar, I mean, there seems to be a lot of, salespeople come and go, canvassers come and go, qualification people come and go, and there's a ton of churn. And so the value of being able to onboard someone quickly in a matter of hours and not a matter of days. I mean, I've been to a lot of solar trainings with various partners, et cetera, and sometimes these trainings for a sales rep is 5 days, right? That training should be, 2 hours, because then, it's a lot to think about to try to click all the buttons, understand how the software works, get what you want out of it, and interact with a customer and have a great sales theater with them. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to make the same point in effect that you think you close an installer, you close their CEO or you close their CFO, and you say, okay, great, now I have their whole team working on my platform. You're nowhere yet, right? The next step
Right.
is every person on the ground needs to understand when to pull it out, what it does well, how to use it. And that is both an ongoing challenge and also a big kind of second step hurdle once you close an installer is what we've seen.
Yeah.
I'm curious, with all that in mind then, how do you guys see this solar software space evolving, this landscape, right? You've talked about the importance of partnering and having not necessarily being the best at every single piece of the value chain. Is that just simply because of where we are as an industry right now with a very fragmented installer base? What does that look like 10 years from now? Is it the same or is it somehow different?
I mean, I can start. Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, I think it's hard to know exactly where we'll end up 10 years from now. I think, there's pretty compelling evidence that there is an efficient frontier, and either you're good at one or two things and people love you, or you're doing everything. And I think there's a race to be deep and narrow now and then expand where you're deep and good, or to be, broad and shallow and try to raise the water level universally across your product space. Like in terms of software providers, it's a race. Everyone wants to get to that holy grail quadrant, and it's just a foot race to see which strategy gets you there faster. But I think separately, there's kind of an issue we haven't been talking about in terms of how the industry evolves, and that's, as you get more completely non-solar companies, where solar is just a fraction of their portfolio, like the Caterpillars of the world, like they're working on solar kits, like they're going to enter solar in a big way. But how does onboarding for them look? Where you talk about caring about the user interface and knowing what to do. They don't even care about solar. They just want a tool that tells them to build a thing that gives them a kit that they can go install, and they don't have to think about it relative to an HVAC unit. They're just slotting in. So I think that's where to me, I think the more interesting questions on a long-term horizon are is how does the software industry kind of bridge the gap between solar pure players and all these construction companies where solar is a couple % of a $1 trillion portfolio.
Yeah, I think, we always talk about industries consolidating. I think we're going to see, standards and processes consolidate. I mean, if you're realistic about it, there's hundreds of utilities. They all have different rules. There's hundreds of AHJs. They all have different rules. Each state has different policies. There's different products in each state. And so you have, and then you have thousands of little installers who all have different processes. So trying to get all that right is really hard. But I think as those things consolidate and standards consolidate, AHJs start treating stuff similar, then you can actually automate real big chunks of the process. And if you do that, then it's not about trying to convince someone to put this into their process. It's just saying that piece is taken care of. And once you can do that, then I think the conversation of an end-to-end platform becomes much more real. And then, as you were saying, then going to different channels, going to a roofer or going to Amazon or someone like that to buy solar becomes realistic and actually viable.
I think just to add to that, I think there's going to be a difference between residential and small commercial. Of course, we don't do the utility scale projects. We do residential, small commercial. We see that the sales models for both these segments will be different, and there'll be more variety, definitely on the residential side. The construction side of the business, though, is going to be more and more similar. You have similar products going on similar buildings. You have definitely more standardization in the hardware space. We're going to see a lot more technology come from the manufacturers. You have to keep an eye out for them as a software vendor. They're actually innovating with software themselves on the inverter, on the panels, and you're seeing very innovative solutions coming out of the market outside the US. You have to watch for Shanghai, you have to watch for India. the next app for shading, the next app for some of these tools are not necessarily where we live. So with those types of roadmaps ahead, you just have to focus on the customer. I really think we need to think about the homeowner and the business owner 5 years from now when they look at a purchase when solar is probably half the price or better, and you have probably better returns. What is the sales cycle going to be like? And how quick is it going to be, as you said, for a decision? Already the 55-inch Samsung TV and a solar system is almost at the same price in Germany. Right? So how hard is that decision? Right? Should it really take more than 20 minutes? Right?
I'm just going to throw out there, I think this frame up of like when you buy a solar system, what do you pay for and who's going to own that is helpful in this context. There's 55% or so that's going to be hardware. I don't see software playing. There's 25% that's the pure build. Maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not. There's construction software that works pretty well. This is not actually a complex construction job, turns out. I believe the other 20% though, the other 20-25% is owned by software. The idea that if this market stays reasonably fragmented, the idea that 6,000 people who are really good at construction are doing their own customer acquisition, are doing their own real-time on-demand procurement is crazy. And we see our partners doing outrageously manual, non-software enabled things on sales, on procurement, frankly on financing as well when they're not working with us. And so I happen to believe that 25% is up for grabs for the software industry. And as I said earlier, I think delivering the solution such that you show up and solve it as opposed to enable them to solve it is where that industry is going.
Sure, we have a few questions from the audience that I want to bring in. And just as a reminder, if you all go to gtm.cnf.io, you can similarly add your questions as well. This one actually, Brian, you already brought up that you don't actually see any, much of a opportunity for construction software. I'm curious if any of the other panelists disagree with that. Is there something in the solar installation side that could be tackled with software?
I can take that. So we developed with Sunshot funding a year and a half ago a standardized workflow management module on our platform. And so we allow our installers to customize their workflows. We allow them to build their own, let's say, layers of document management and alerts and notifications. Some of the basics that pretty much all construction software would have. We found a mixed response. We found a lot of our customers like using what we have. There are several others, though, who were already using Salesforce or some other construction software who would rather stick on to that module instead of our module. So to answer your question, there's really no clear winner in the construction workflow software space. That being said, it's upon us, I think, people in this room to create value. Solar construction is very unique. It's not the same as roofing. It's not the same as HVAC. It's far more complex. If you look at the steps, that's not going to change whether the price is $5,000 for a system or $10,000. You still have to do all of those steps. You still have to get a permit. You still have to do the shading. So it's for us in the room to really nail that construction workflow. It hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, I would say from our standpoint, and we've done a bit of the same workflow things. Like people ask for the same document management stuff, but if you think of where the opportunities are, and going back to Paul's slides and the main thing driving the industry, it's growth. So like construction management, fundamentally, you're in the cost shaving part of what you're doing. And to what you were saying, like if we can build a software tool that like effectively automates, this is what you should design, these are the parts you need, all this stuff, like suddenly you've changed how the industry works. Suddenly a homeowner can go on a site, they can go to Google Sunroof, get a design you'd actually want to build, pick easily like, oh, just give me like this 5-star installer to install. Like at that point, like that really changes an installer's bottom line and how the industry expands. So like you go on Amazon and do the same thing. That changes, that's a step change for the industry that we need to get to. But construction management, it's interesting, but it's marginal to me in terms of thinking about the future. Whether your document management is Salesforce or something else, you might save a little bit of money, but it seems like the market's being won on growth and customer acquisition.
Just to clarify my thought, software is eating the world. Construction is being massively changed by software. I used to invest in construction software, non-solar specific. I just haven't seen, to disagree a little bit, I have not seen that the construction software that exists, and there are winners and leaders in that industry, there are billion-dollar companies being built there. I have not seen that those aren't good tools for solar. I.e., I don't see a solar construction software industry. I think there's a construction industry that's being changed by software that those tools can be well applied to solar.
There is an interesting aspect, though, of like bridging the construction management software into asset management and other things that like KWH Analytics are doing, et cetera. Like I think that's kind of an important problem for solar and software specifically that'll happen long term, where asset management is kind of like it's a thing we don't really like talking about because it's like we're so focused on growth and building a lot, but there are a lot of kind of crappy systems that were built over the last 5 or 10 years, and that's gonna affect a lot of companies in interesting ways.
That's oh, go ahead, Thomas.
So
Sorry, Eric.
one more sentence to that. So we're talking about, when we say the ultra long tail, and we talk about longer and longer tail of installers. They don't need a workflow management system, right? They know how to do their job. For their 2 jobs a week, they don't need necessarily software. Once they get to a bigger scale, they might need software. But let's make sure we don't overcomplicate something that is not to be overcomplicated. And for Sunrun, it's a different story than if you are a mom and pop shop with 2 installs a week, right?
Jigar Shah is fond of saying that that's the most profitable installer in the country. A mom and pop shop with 2 trucks that does 3 a week.
Yeah.
In that they are profitable.
That they're the most profitable. That's his assertion. I'm just throwing it out there. So we're talking long tail.
Eric, you were
Yeah, these guys have covered a lot of good stuff. I think as you scale, the problems become much bigger, right? I think it's back to that complexity of like every AHJ is different. So you do need a very flexible task management system to manage how this certain county in Arizona handles it versus a certain county in California. And you have different tasks and different performance management metrics around those tasks to get a project built. I think the other thing is the long tail scales. They're going to realize that when you have hundreds of customers, they all have to have a great standardized experience. And I think a lot of people are used to getting to the construction site and making decisions about changing the design, moving the panel, the main panel, understanding that maybe you need to do the conduit differently, et cetera. And you can't make those choices on the fly anymore because that means a change with the customer, that means the customer doesn't have a great experience, that means your construction times go out. And so you have to start balancing all that complexity and managing it, and then also communicating to the customer effectively and in real time so that the customer has a great experience throughout. And we saw that data earlier about how as you scale, you get less referrals as a percentage, right? And that is part of the problem, right? When you're installing 2 systems a month, it's great. You can give great, perfect customer service. You have the CEO of the company talking to the customer, right? But how do you do that when you're installing thousands? And that means software. That's really the only way.
I'm curious for Sunrun then specifically, when you're working with some of your partners. Of course, they're not necessarily doing everything through Sunrun, but do you find them starting to standardize around your platform at all, or do they just kind of have multiple processes going on?
Yeah, and again, it's the answer is about size. So, if it's a small company that does a lot of cash sales, then it's pretty easy for them to just follow our process when they sell a PPA or lease. When you get to a much bigger company, they're going to want multiple PPAs they want to sell, and they might be in multiple states, and they might actually have dabbled in their own financing at one point. And so getting them to adopt your process is a much different conversation, and that's where you are kind of building in that ability to kind of treat everyone differently, that modularize your platform. I guess it's back to the platform answer of then they can use certain pieces of it, and then they can use their own process and their own software for the pieces they're good at.
Great. So touching, Brian, when you kind of outlined the cost stack, and Paul, you also brought this up, but thinking about the O&M side and the asset management side, how does this fit into this platform we're building? Is O&M just a cost center, and how, or is there an opportunity that can be managed again, and how does software play into that?
Sure, take a crack at that. Not just a cost center, huge opportunity that's not, I think, baked into the capital markets today. I spend a lot of my time on Wall Street trying to convince them to give us money to finance solar projects. And they don't give you a lot of credit for the asset backing that a solar project represents, and more accurately, the stream of retail electricity sales that a solar project represents. Probably the most important data point in the solar industry, as far as I'm concerned, is the 81-cent recovery value that SolarCity published as part of their 2014 securitization, which is to say in residential PPAs, they get 81 cents on the dollar in the case of default by going back to a new homeowner or potentially a post-bankruptcy homeowner and just selling them power, right, at admittedly a discounted rate at 81 cents, right? That's outrageously good in the asset-backed security market. Like, I don't know if people in the solar industry understand how outrageously good 81 cents is. Like, 81 cents is better than grade A commercial real estate for a bank, right? That is not priced into the capital markets today, is my read. We're putting out 8.5% commercial paper. That should be 6.5% with the quality of this asset backing. And so for me, asset management, O&M, making sure the builds are good from the start, warranty strength, all of these things are going to drive down the cost of capital of solar over the next 5 to 10 years as the capital markets start to understand that in a downside scenario, if 2008 happens again and we don't recover, like it gets bad, you are going to desperately want solar securities. Because if you see 20, 25% default and you're getting 80 cents on the dollar back, so your effective rate is like mid-single digits, you're going to be the best performing, better than that. You probably break even, right? In our money, 8.5%, you may make 2% or 1%. That is going to be literally the best performing asset class in the case of a downfall. And so I think that it'll actually be great. I'm not rooting for a recession or anything, but I think that
That's kind of you.
I kind of am. I think if we go through a cycle, I think solar is going to show its quality, and I think you're going to see the cost of capital go down dramatically. So I think it is massively strategic that as an industry we get really good at asset management and O&M, and there's a big software story there.
The problem with the software story, it needs people and boots on the ground, right? And if the Great Recession hits, that you hope for or speak about, the problem is a lot of those boots on the ground are gone. And unless we can create a business model where we make it profitable for you to go out and actually fix that homeowner's system or the business system, you will end up with a non-serviceable asset because nobody really cares about doing this. So that is the big problem. Software will not help you get the boots on the ground for that.
But can it help you manage and lower the cost of those boots on the ground and just deploy?
Absolutely, but you have to have an infrastructure of having those boots on the ground. Right? So how do you manage those boots on the ground? I think with what you say is certainly true, but the problem that we're facing is like that we still haven't figured out how to manage this disaggregated number of installs nationwide and on a scale that's mainly financed through large PPAs and businesses that are inherently unstable because they were built on different premises. And so in the long run, yes, you have a retained value of the system, but how do you service the system is not yet quite adjudicated. And we don't know yet how to do this right. And software will help, but how do you get those boots on the ground and how do you manage these with a consistent service level throughout the country as well?
I got my money on robotic drones.
Flying them to the roofs. And just,
Fly them in there.
all right, next great idea. Is Arvind still out there?
I'll take maybe one more to add to that. We found our installers came and talked about the need for better communication with their customers, engagement with homeowners and business owners. And one of our installers brought up the idea that, well, we don't really have a basic measurement and verification of solar returns for a hotel owner or a commercial retail shop that's now finally investing their money into solar. No more PPAs. So on our new customer management module, which we just launched, we start with the basics, saying this is what your solar proposal promised you, and this is what you get, finally, right? I mean, basic M&V, because the PPA, of course, models allowed certain numbers, but they're really not tied to what was proposed, and really bringing down, dissecting and getting the data out there for large portfolio owners to finally make their own decisions on what they need to buy, because it's not going to be all financed.
Are they going to be happy about those results or not?
Well, that's the next step. I mean, let's look at the numbers. Of course, you always have this gaming going on, what the performance guarantee will be versus what it actually is. But I think the market's ready for that next level, especially when big money now comes in for the returns that Brian was talking about. When big money enters this space, they're looking for their own data. Is after all their own money, their own systems. They're investing into it. They'll probably do it across the country. There'll be franchises, hotels, hospitals, etc. So there's going to be a real need for software to first of all understand the basics. Then you have O&M that tracks that to repair these systems when they're broken, right? The whole thing has to work for them.
Yeah, I think that software can really help in that situation. I think that is probably where big data or data science or machine learning, AI, all of that is really going to actually have the biggest impact in solar, because you need to be able to tell, why someone's production is going up or down based on tree growth, soiling, maybe the customer is screwed with the system. All of that you can tell through data. And I think that's where that sophistication of being able to, and understanding the weather too. So if you have the weather, you can understand tree growth, you can understand soiling, all through data, then you can actually go out to a customer proactively and really give them a great experience and fix their system before they know it's not working correctly.
So to kind of keep picking on you, Eric, so one of the questions from the audience is, obviously Sunrun and some of your peers have deployed a lot of money and investment into software tools. Is there a benefit for the industry as a whole, or are these just going to be kept in the silos of these large companies to stay with them forever?
No, I mean, that is our hope. I think, again, we build these tools for ourselves and our partner network, and we don't forget about our partner network when we build these tools. But again, it's the size, right? When we go out to a partner and say, we have this automated design tool, and the partner says, that's not my cost center is design. I got one guy who's an artist who does this perfectly. I don't need this step automated. So sometimes, what we build that is so effective for us isn't that valuable to our partner network. With that said, though, I think if we can actually get end to end, and automate massive chunks of the solar process, then when we go out to a partner, whether they're big or small, they'll be able to get benefit from it. But again, then that also, the other complexity of that is if they have another financing partner they're working with, then sometimes coming to them and saying, hey, we can automate this whole process, they say, great, but we have to keep all those people on our payroll because they have to support the process for the other financing partner. So we don't they don't always get a benefit from the automation we create.
So our approach to that is we want to be in the background, right? We would like to actually see our installers out there succeed with platform solutions out there. And yes, we have dabbled in the software ourselves, but the idea is create the best solution, allowing them to grow without being, forgive my hard word, being forced into an ecosystem that may or may not work for their solution, and which may or may not be most flexible for them in the long run. This is why we believe the construction industry, the HVAC industry is a good indicator of where this is going. And as a distributor and as a service provider, we don't want our name plastered all over that. We don't want them to have the trucks run with our names. We want them to have the solution in the background that whatever the best solution is will be tailored for them, and they get the democracy of utilizing whatever is best for them. And we don't believe in, just like with financing, the solution is probably not a one nationwide approach and one nationwide company that forces installers into that system.
So how does SolarGen actually help then, or do you sort of just leave the installers to fend on their own?
No, so just like with product, just like with logistics, just like with all of this, we do vet. We do have conversations with lots of people actually on this panel as well. SolarEngine, our value-added resource services, has the specific mission to figure out how to add those services to the installer. But again, our goal is not to pick winners and losers. Our goal is to vet and then deploy that to our customer base and say, look, this will make your life easier. This is what makes you more successful, and you don't have to worry about being forced in a bigger mold that may or may not fit you.
Great. So we have a few minutes left, so if people have more questions, please keep them rolling. I do kind of want to switch gears because we've talked a lot about what we should be building and not a whole lot about how we should be building it. And specifically, for the gentlemen here who actually are hiring software developers or people to help build these platforms. Solar software isn't exactly like Facebook or Snapchat or something, a super high-profile tech company. So how do you actually attract talent to want to work in solar software specifically?
We've been incredibly successful pitching mission. So we just pulled a gentleman out of Ray Dalio's hedge fund who took a 80% pay cut. We hired a senior engineer out of Apple that took a 70% pay cut. And both of those gentlemen were very much motivated by The picture we painted about how they could use Wonder as their Archimedes lever to accelerate solar.
Do you want to negotiate some of these offer letters we're about
Sure.
to send out for
Yeah,
us?
bring them on over.
Yeah, I think for us, I think we sell having like a very smart small team, and we sell like the scope of the problems that need to be solved. So yeah, we're not Facebook, but Facebook, they're an advertising company. Google's an advertising company, and like there's a little bit of mission in there, but it's also like if you work for us, you get to deal with LiDAR. Like how do you build a financing engine that takes in like the legal terms of every possible financing deal people want to do? Like there's some very complicated technical challenges. Like how do you automatically lay out a system on a roof? How do you take an image and go straight to feature extraction and say, this is a surface I would actually want to put solar panels on there, and what panels I would want to build? There are a ton of really interesting technical problems, and the fact that the industry is nascent means that you take an engineer from Google, like we've got one. He was on their computer vision team, and he spends 3 months doing like a research project that makes one thing slightly better. That's what Google needs. But for us, you get to build an entire platform, if you're an equivalent engineer. So there are a lot of very ambitious, very smart engineers that want to attack this space.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think, too, is just you get tangible impact, right? There's what you release, you see immediately have its effect in the field, and that means more solar on roofs. And I think that's an experience that not many other companies get to have, where what you release is just tangible immediately. So that's really cool.
I mean, the other thing to compare that we talk about with our hires is the really strong need in this market for software engineers. I've spent some time in the fintech industry and the advertising industry, and there are 50 great small software teams going after every interesting problem space. And in commercial soft costs, there are whole areas where I think there are maybe billion-dollar companies, but at the very least, multi-hundred-million-dollar companies to be built, where there is no one playing. There's no VC-backed software company playing in commercial customer acquisition. That is insane. That is truly insane compared to the density of software engineers and other problem spaces. So I think you can also pitch this is where you're needed. No one needs a 5th map tool or a 17th messaging tool, but this space desperately needs your help. So we pitch that too.
Nice.
Yeah, I would like to add, we always recruited people with a lot of experience in the industry, and we haven't been able to get the 70% pay cuts. But we had to negotiate hard, and as you all know, this space is not laden with investment dollars, so we have to watch for hires. Every one of them counts. It's a small team. We have also been very lucky. Early on, we were able to build a very small but strong team in India, and from day one, they've been pretty much on our QA and release process, which really reduces our cost of delivery of software. But even India is a very challenging space for talent. As Brian said, there's a lot of startups, so you have to watch the cost of hiring even in India.
Great. One last question before we move on to the networking break. Earlier you're talking about, again, this partner ecosystem, standardizing processes. I know Elaine from the DOE is out there somewhere, but they've launched this Orange Button initiative that's trying to standardize some of the what's happening in the solar software space, the data transfer, but the question here is that there hasn't been a lot of involvement by solar software companies, and so is that something that's not necessarily valuable or not a priority, or just curious, how you guys generally see this sort of government-funded initiative to try to apply more standards to the software space?
Take this one. Yeah, I mean, I have a very strong belief that, especially in software, standards are emergent. Like, you don't say, I've defined a new standard, let's go build around this. And I think everything's moving too fast for someone to say, this is the right standard we should be building, let's all get around this and then build to that. Because it's like you spend a year defining the standard, then maybe you spend a year implementing the standard, and then you've got a standard 2 years out of date based on what people are actually doing in the market dynamics. And I think you see that in tech over and over again. So like a recent example, like I don't know if you guys are familiar with like USB-C cables, like the new USB-C standard. That's literally a direct clone of Apple's Lightning cable. And the idea was, USB had been around for years. There were like a million competing standards, and they were all kind of mediocre in different ways. So Apple just used the fact that they were big and vertically integrated and said, we're doing this Lightning cable thing on our own. We're big enough that we can actually do this. And then the USB-C standards body just came back and followed that. They followed what was actually being done and was actually proving to be effective, and just took the best parts of that, standardized it, made an industry thing. And my sense for how Solar Evolve is there's going to be the same storyline, where we're going to congeal around things that work and then turn what's working into a standard rather than find a standard and hope that it works.
So the standards already exist, and we must not forget that those are long-term assets, right? Those are long-term assets in the room for 20 years. And the inverter manufacturers have a good deal of software innovation and software development there. The standards come from IEEE, NEC. And when we talk about software, when we talk about O&M, when we talk about all of these aspects, the software, the hardware plays a much bigger role in this aspect than on the front end and in the back end. So some of the standards are being given to us already by IEEE, NEC, UL, and manufacturers are working very hard on that. And the question is, how do you integrate that with the rest of the spectrum?
Just to can I quickly throw something in, sorry. I think the Sunshot Initiative is incredibly well intended, and thank you, Sunshot people in the room. I think it is outrageously over-prescriptive and misunderstands the nature of innovation. I think the idea that a government entity is going to tell us where they're going to fund and exactly what it's going to do is crazy. If you study the history of innovation, I think they should be broadly funding areas that they know are problem spaces and leaving the market to itself. So even to take your point a bit farther, like the idea that they're coming in and being prescriptive and saying this year we're going to focus on this and this is what we're going to fund and that's going to generate innovation really, really misunderstands my understanding of how innovation works. So I think they'd be much better off just saying, hey, if you have a great team and you're in solar, here's $2 million, go have fun. That would be a vastly better program.
Go have fun.
Seriously.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Hopefully have fun.
Well, first, our experience with Sunshot has been very positive. I think in terms of their delivery, the milestones that have to be met to actually get the money is around customer proof points, use of the product you've developed. So it's not free money, and it's well
That's
intended.
crazy too, though.
So
Setting goals a year out, what your customer metrics are going to be. Has anyone been at a startup?
Right, and
There's
that's
no
challenging.
way those are right.
It's challenging, but so it's not free money. Coming back to standards, two points. One is we really see a need for compliance in the solar sales process. I think once the industry grows from 10 billion to maybe 20 or 30 billion, someone somewhere is going to come up with basic compliance. I mean, insurance has it, mortgage has it. How can anyone be a solar salesperson, have a $20,000 investment door to door? When compliance comes into the space, I think that's probably going to drive a lot of the need for standards around finance, basic finance standards. The other point I would like to make is a green button has been an initiative which is maybe 7 or 8 years old now, and we haven't seen green button take off yet. And I think the point that we just made was it takes a time to get the standard to be adopted, and then once it's adopted, it takes more time for the software vendors to actually standardize around that. So it's going to take several cycles before orange button becomes green button.
Okay, great. A wide array of opinions here, but that's all the time that we have. We're moving right into a networking break, but before then, please thank these gentlemen for their thoughts.
Thank you.